like to welcome everyone that is joining us virtually, and certainly welcome the folks that are here, and the folks that are here will get introduced in just a moment. They're going to be introducing themselves, but I want to welcome those folks that are here and virtually the School Board's Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee monthly, unless we have crises. Unfortunately, that does happen occasionally. And what we'll do now is, my name is Eve Bolton. I'm happy to be chair of this committee, and we're going to start with our wonderful Kathy, who will give us the do's might be able to participate in the meeting and also introduce himself, and then we'll go around the meeting.
Good morning. If you'd like to speak during the speaking public of the section of the agenda at the end of the meeting, please click your hand icon and we will ask you your name and school association and fill that out in the chat, and we will invite you in to speak during the speaking of the public session. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Roberts, and I'm the Chief Audit Executive.
Good morning. My name is Cody Hutchins, and I'm the Contract Analyst.
Good morning. Michael Gustin, Assistant Treasurer.
Good morning. Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer. Dr. Moffitt, CPS Board Member.
Brandon Craig, CPS Board Member.
Good morning. My name is David Foote. I'm a member of the Audit Committee.
Josh Harden, District's Athletics Manager.
Good morning, Jaron Gray, Principal, Withrow University High School.
We need more.
Good morning, Matt Dektis from the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation.
Well, thank you. And again, thanks for joining us online, and also those of us that are here are anxious to hear the report that we will start the agenda with, as well as all the other items we have to discuss. And I'm going to turn, now I'm going to turn to Mr. Floyd, who will probably turn to Harden, who will then turn to we'll start with General Counsel, who is the person that brought this to our attention, and Mr. Floyd.
Thanks. I'm pleased to introduce Matt Dektis from the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation. This has been a partnership that CPS has had for, well, I'll let Matt get into the history, but something the board has seen before. It's been before the Finance Committee. Josh Harden from our Athletics Department and Jaron Gray, Principal of Withrow High School, are also here. They're familiar with the proposal as well, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Dektis.
Hey everyone, thankful to be here, and we're grateful for the partnership of CPS. The intention of being here is to kind of update y'all on something that we talked about a few years ago, virtually in a meeting. It's the tennis and education program that we're doing at Withrow High School, and Jaron and Josh are here as well, and they've been great partners, and we've been connecting with them along the way. So in about 2021, we were looking for a home for some of our tennis and education programs. We were doing a lot of things across the city, and we talked with Jaron, and he had some vision of how we could partner. And so we were able to come to Withrow and take some courts that were pretty dilapidated with giant holes, and it was basically a dog park, and we were able to resurface for about $100,000 investment, and we put things like wheelchair ramps, and we put an accessible pathway and things of that nature, because we do many programs that have adaptive needs. And over the last couple of years, we've been able, with Withrow's help, to build a pretty nice community ad back there, and back there meaning the court space back there. And so anyway, last year we had about 1,800 players come through the program. We've had we've had a great diversity of participants. We've had 41 schools represented in the CPS network, and it's been great. And last winter we used the Academy of World Languages for our programming, which was amazing. But it is a gym and it's not a tennis court, and so we've been kind of farming out to all these different places and a little fragmented in the winter, which is, it kind of defeats our purpose of making tennis and education accessible, and now pickleball too, by the way. But you know, it makes it less accessible, kind of. Right? So we're trying to think like, how can we do it in a way year round? And part of that is to have an indoor footprint that's in the urban core. And so we've been kind of hemming and hawing around different concepts, and the money has been an issue. So now we've brung it back a little bit toward a model that would be a one-court indoor facility that would have classrooms and bathrooms and an indoor tennis court, and there would be 4 pickleball courts on it. And it would be a bit of a multi-use space for the campus. There'd be some opportunities for the other athletes, student athletes, to use it on rain days, things like that. And then it would just be a way to continue to build into the community. So that's what we wanted to make you aware of today. That's the intention of me coming. And then I don't know if Jaron wanted to add something, or Josh, or I got it all.
Just wanted to add that the partnership has been fantastic, working with the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation. One of my primary objectives is to make sure that tennis was accessible for all students in Cincinnati Public Schools, and to really begin that process of providing programming during the summers, during our summer scholars and summer school times. We've partnered with Cincinnati Tennis Foundation and Matt and Nikki Chiaffi to do programming throughout the summer, and giving our students an opportunity to be exposed to tennis, which has been phenomenal. They've gravitated towards it. They're very excited about it. We are also implementing and looking to adopt some programming during some of our phys ed times during the school year in our phys ed classes. I think the point that Matt made in terms of having a year-round facility, as you know, a lot of athletes in all sports are training year-round. And if our students across the district are going to improve and be able to compete district-wide against one another, it's not just a Withrow thing, but it's really a district piece. You really need indoor facilities to be able to do that. Starting, the weather's changing, as most of you know. We're tail end of mid-September to the tail end of September, and being able to play outdoors is going to be limited here over the next 5 or 6 months or so, until the weather breaks in the spring. So great opportunity. We've been working with Matt and his team for the last 2 or 3 years or so, to see also access for students with disabilities and so forth, and having programming for that. And this is nothing new. They've been working with our urban students throughout the city for years, way before they brought this opportunity for us. And they're just continuing to build upon their vision, and we want to be a part of it. So thank you.
I won't be long here, but just in regards to the partnership, I just want to make it clear that for athletics to grow, we can't do what we do without great partners. And when we look at sports, we try to identify partners within the community to help us grow those particular sports. So baseball and softball, for example, we have a phenomenal partnership with the Reds Community Fund, Charlie Frank. When we had the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation, Matt and Nikki approach us years back when this initially started, we talked about the growth of tennis within the inner city as a whole. And now I'm very excited that we'll also be talking about the growth of pickleball in the city, because I really enjoy that sport. We got a huge donation to start pickleball in our elementary schools, and so we'll be piloting that in a couple schools. But Just really want to share that we have collaborated with Cincinnati Tennis Foundation on a junior high tennis program. So in our schools that don't have sports such as tennis or lacrosse or swimming or wrestling on the junior high side of things, we partner with community partners to provide a collaborative CPS team. And so tennis is one of those sports where the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation in the fall will get a group of junior high girls together and will combine them to make a CPS junior high tennis team. And then they'll do the same thing in the spring season with the ultimate goal that will grow. We'll have a facility that will help them grow to be able to do more. And then we eventually be able to say, hey, we've got this CPS collaborative junior high tennis team. And now in 3 years, we see junior high tennis teams popping up throughout the city in our schools. And then years later, we start talking about our tennis stars on the high school level that go out and compete because they've been given an opportunity that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And then they go out and see the Coco Gauffs of the world and see themselves in those champions. And in those years, we'll see that CPS will produce some of those champions. But really appreciate the partnership. It's been great working with Principal Gray and Withrow and the Cincinnati Tennis.
Other, who want to participate or have any questions for the board members? Questions, comments?
Vice President Craig can go first.
Okay.
Sure. Again, I want to thank you all for coming, and I actually love the work with this. I have some actually really good friends who went to college based on playing tennis. So like that's something that I think is a strong part of recognizing the benefits beyond just learning a skill, learning discipline, learning the sports and the rules and sportsmanship and the other parts to it, that are associated with athletics. I really think also, speaking to what Josh just mentioned there about the junior high athletics, I think there's the other part to it that it prepares students to have something to grow towards in high school. And if they have facilities, if we have spaces for them to be better, get training, to work on skills, that's tremendous. One thing I was kind of curious about, and you mentioned a little bit about kind of keeping the space open for the public use. Is there a thought process regarding kind of what that public use might be when there's nothing else going on there?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that's kind of an anticipated question because I think that's a tricky thing. First of all, it would be partnering with Withrow to make sure that we're taking care of the community. So we do that some on our outdoor courts now. The indoor would be a little more important to do it on. I think for the way that a lot of the public venues operate that have like public play or whatever, it's basically like whenever there's not a program, it's open to the public. And then so it's our job to program correctly, robustly, but not overwhelmingly, right? And then have it where it's not programmed, it's available. So I think we would work really closely with Withrow on that. Obviously, with a one-court indoor, it isn't like super, ginormous of an opportunity as far as like amount of play, but I think there'll be enough there to definitely use the space. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. It does. And I think the other thing that comes to my mind is just that, we've talked about the community learning center space being something that's open for folks to be able to utilize. And it really just means finding out the logistics of how do we make sure folks know how to do that. Because I would imagine there are like limitations on when the space would be technically open.
I think that'll be really important. Things we've considered in the design or like the restrooms in the back, we've considered having them, open to the public where it can't get you into the building. For example, on a time we aren't there, where right now there's a restroom need in the back, So like there's a lot of things like that need to be considered. That would just be one example. So I think that's going to be part of our further discussions as we plan for sure. And that's a big part of the planning. I know Jaron, since day one, and actually Josh too, But what's in it for Withrow? What's in it for CPS? That's very important to us, and I think hopefully we've shown credibility there where we're going to work together on that.
So I went last because I'm very partial to the Tigers. I have 3 alum in my home, so I try not to be biased, but I am slightly, so it's okay. But I do have a couple questions for you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for your work, Mr. Principal Gray and Josh. I'm really, really big on partnerships. And so having said that statement, you may know where my question is going. I think tennis and then including pickleball is excellent. I kind of want to learn myself. So I know there is a facility downtown, and to know that there would be a pickleball facility closer in the community is actually pretty exciting to me. I have a question for Josh and then a question for you all. So I know, again, I'm dating myself, but Withrow used to be in the ECC, and there was they had a lot of different sports and teams that we did not have. And I don't know if tennis was one of them, but I think swimming was one of them or something like that. Are there any possibilities for that in our current league? Because I know we're not with the ECC any longer, but are there any opportunities for that for our young people in their current league, in the leagues that we're in the district, to have an opportunity to do that with regular league play, tennis, pickleball?
Yes. So as we look to add sports, the concept that I was sharing in regards to partnering up in some of the sports that we don't currently offer on the junior high side of things, so that it does grow to the point that we can offer it on the conference side of things. So as it stands now, you would need 4 schools to be able to recognize a sport as a conference aligned sport.
Okay.
Right. So as we build up tennis, we would be identifying first, and we've already done some of this, but the schools that have the potential because they have tennis courts that are pretty close to them and or on their campus,
Okay.
or on one of our elementary campuses, to try and pilot it and start it up. So these sports, for example, we've started that past couple years. We had 2 schools that had it. We're growing. Once we get to that point that we have 4 schools that have the sport, then we can officially call it a conference sport.
Okay.
So of course, Withrow would be a part of that tennis pilot. Aiken is currently looking to start some tennis programs. Usually anytime I say Aiken, when Board Member Bolden's here, I hear a swoop. I hear a swoop. I can't believe I didn't hear a swoop.
I saw her moving. I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah. I couldn't believe that. But yeah, so we would be starting it with 4 schools and then acknowledge it as the official.
But they have to have a home tennis court? Would they have to have
It would be required that they have a home tennis court. So we would have the opportunity, same way that, we have Stargell Stadium as the district stadium. That a lot of our schools utilize Stargell as their home field. We would just partner and just have to identify on the transportation side of things, making sure that it worked. But yes, it's the goal that we will be able to acknowledge this as a conference sport in the CMAC.
Okay. You said that T word, that just makes me shudder, transportation. My other question, or my other 2 questions, I'm not exactly sure who can answer them, but I am, again, big on partnerships and collaborations. And so I'm wondering, is there any collaboration, and I'm thinking big, but like with Western Southern, ABC, other organizations that I think Withrow has isn't Western Southern one of our partners already? So I'm wondering, can they sponsor or at least assist in, can this be bigger, not taking anything away from you, but is there an opportunity for other larger sponsors to help with this as other partners?
Are you speaking for the building or for the program or just everything?
However you want to answer it, it's fine.
No, I mean, I think what Josh said, first of all, is really important. You don't just poof the Magic Dragon have high school teams, it takes grassroots building, and that's what's been missing, I think, in this sport. And so we're trying to do a better job of that with the elementary, the tennis and pickle 101 programs, and we want to start healthy with pickle. I just want to throw that in because he was, talking about that. Western and Southern actually just sponsored our annual event on. They're the presenting sponsor on 10/21. We have an annual event to raise money. and they're going to be very supportive of community efforts. So I'm feeling really good about them. That they have, there's a little bit of controversy about if they're going to stay in town or whatever the tournament, but they've been very supportive, and I think pretty much anything we put toward them, they're supporting. So they're kind of viewing us, I think, currently as a community provider in the sport, if that makes sense. And like, they're supportive, but they're not quite doing the programming. You know what I mean? Because they have so many other fish to fry. So I don't know if that helps.
It does help. I mean, I know that they were already a partner with us and on our LSDMC, so that's why I kind of naturally segued into that. And my last question is regarding, you mentioned that the building and the facility may go back towards the trail. Has there been any community inclusion with, because that's, I mean, they spent a lot of money on that Wasson Trail, so is there any community input with regard to that?
We've had a couple of, well, more than a couple of meetings with the Hyde Park Community Council and planning, and with some neighbors too, and also with different architects. And so this is, probably version 5.0, which is good and bad, I think. But basically on the design, the idea of where we have the building now is completely different than where we had it before. It's much smaller, and it's much more away from the neighbors.
I gotcha.
And then for cost-wise, it's much more front of the property, which electric and utilities and all those things are much better. I don't know that stuff, but we're learning. And so because it's in the front of the property, it's much cheaper. If you put in the back, there's like they were saying something like I don't know, a prohibitive amount of money to run utilities and things back there. So where we have it now, if you can see, there's a gap between the neighborhood is where the tree line is there. So there's quite a bit of space there, and there's actually still a tree line blocking that building. And then if we were to expand it, you could expand it long ways to still away from the neighbors over the current courts. So that would be really nice for the neighborhood, we think, and the Hyde Park Council has advised us on that.
Okay.
So I think it's moving in the right direction as far as that goes.
Well, it sounds great. My only other statement, and I'll be brief, is I need you to invite board members to the pickleball stuff, because I really do want to attend. So just keep us posted.
We were talking about that. We want to have like a football party, tournament.
Yeah, I think.
We'll
For sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so some open questions there. When CTF made the substantial investment in resurfacing the courts, the board approved an agreement at that point which allowed the CTF to have some exclusive use of the courts for their camps and summer programming, much of which, as Matt said, benefits CPS kids, students with disabilities. They've done a great job with that, and I do think established a lot of credibility with us. In terms of moving forward, I think that some next steps will include some further discussions with the community or community council, the Withrow community. Jaren and I talked about that, alumni association, and so we wanted to make sure the board was aware that those conversations would be happening, because you might hear some feedback, and we welcome that feedback. In terms of, we would work out some kind of what's anticipated is we'd work out both a lease and then an operations agreement that would really define the roles of CPS and foundation. I think CTF has represented that they have the lion's share of the money to be able to build the building, but I think might be looking for some asks from CPS in terms of that shared use of restroom space. There might be some parking expansion, and that would all be still subject to discussion and approval by the board.
And the happiness we've had in having the neighborhood Page 10, we have so just say that if you expand the I'm asking like this is fit into how does it fit in
Well, where the existing courts are currently, as you can see from the diagram, the facility is going to be pushed slightly in front of the current tennis courts. So it almost will be in alignment with our parking. Parking is an issue at Withrow. And so this will open up additional parking, not take away. Yeah, it should open up additional parking where the current courts are and where the new facility is in front of those existing courts. You know, that's a trail leading back to the courts at this time. So again, the tree line that's there, the neighborhood on Kendall is behind the tree line. So again, the facility in terms of the height of the facility is probably right at the tree line there. So it's not going to, you know, aesthetically, hopefully not interfere with the aesthetics of the property. But you can see, again, there's some additional parking there with this facility, and then has the option of expanding over the existing courts space where that is. No. Well, we currently have Ron Oster. It's Ron Oster Field. So, yeah, Withrow alum. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Now the yes, it does. And so I believe some of the original designs and drawings, as Matt mentioned, that location would have impeded some of our, like our junior high ball field, but because of the cost related to, you know, installing electric and water lines and the whole nine, closer to Wasson Way would have been is where the original plan is. This does not get close to that. It utilizes the existing property and the existing courts where they currently are, but moves it closer towards our existing parking lots.
We've got the ball fields, we've got the parking lot and all that stuff, and we know not to make the Hyde Park neighbors upset and to take care of the Wasson Trail.
Yes.
The last thing from a as a sister of an architect, the profile of the building in no way, shape, or form detracts from the magnificent Withrow profile from passing transportation or cars, or I mean, it's not obstructing how beautiful Withrow is.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think out of all the designs that have been prepared, I think this is this is the design that you know, is the least disruptive to the aesthetics of the campus and the history of the campus. So,
thank you. Any questions, Superintendent, Treasurer, board members? General Counsel's cool with whatever these future arrangements are going to be plotted out? I'm just worried about those ball fields and those Hyde Park neighbors. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go Tigers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's go to our monthly financial reports. Treasurer, would you please introduce what you want covered today?
So, Chair Bolton, I was going to ask, we have another guest speaker today. I was wondering if we could have Ms. Ingelicio present the benefits progress update so that she
She
can.
lives in College Hill. She could speak. She could have spoke before the tennis people.
I do also live in the center of the university.
That's right.
That's right.
Is this thing not working?
So while she's passing those documents out, the Finance Committee had asked for regular updates from the internal audit recommendations to the benefits team. And so Ms. Indalacio is covering for Chief Riley, who cannot be here today.
Yes. Oh, email it to. Good morning. I'm Julia Indalacio, the HR Talent Director, and benefits follows under my view. And last year, in FY23, we worked very closely with Lauren and her team to really dig deep into our benefits to find out where are some areas that we need some distinct improvement, what's going okay, what's going well, but did the whole audit process, and we learned quite a bit. I learned quite a bit. I started in this role about a year ago, and I started with the audit. Welcome. And so I feel like I learned a lot from working with Laura and her team. It was really insightful work, and gave us some definite ideas for process improvements. So what we have for you today is an update, and we'll routinely provide updates to the Finance Committee to make sure that you're aware of what's happening with benefits. And we did give you a little bit deeper dive today because we haven't done an overview with this team. But this benefit auto, if you look at this, the report, we first kind of just looked at, there's a table on the first page that really outlines what was the processes, what are the existing processes, and what has to happen to make benefits work. We did have the findings. So the audit report was reported out to the audit committee on May 3rd. And the areas for the distinct areas for findings were under development accurate and efficient processes, improve our data validation, and increase fiscal responsiveness. And so what you'll see on page 2 is a table that lists those areas and where we are in terms of making progress towards that end. Should I wait? Okay, go ahead. Okay, I'm sorry. So this is our focus. So this is our progress overview table, and that you can see that we've put in yellow areas that we're still working on, and green are that are on track. And so dependent verification, COBRA management, and data validation, we put out to RFP this summer. And we heard from vendors in August, and we're scoring those out, and then we will invite the top performers back in the next few weeks to give us a demo of their software and of how they could help us, and make some decisions from there. And so that we expect to have that completed in October. Data validation is with that, but we do feel like we're more on track with that. We've done some things internally that will help us with our data validation. In terms of process documentation, our benefits team is meeting bi-monthly and reviewing processes. We have created a folder with processes, and we're creating them in the swim lane style that we are accustomed to here in the district for those pieces. And then finally, the hiring of the benefit analysts that will help us with that data validation piece. That's a critical move for us, and that position was posted after the August 28th approval at the board meeting. So thank you for that. And we've started interviews. We had 2 interviews this week. We have 2 next week, and we expect that person to start in October. So that's where we are. That's a high level. What we provided with you on the next 2 pages are a little bit deeper dive into that same information. Kind of talk you just through those pieces. But I do want to highlight some of the accomplishments we have to date. And right now we have 100% of our enrollments for this year have the proper documentation to receive benefits. that sounds like that should be maybe be a no-brainer. Isn't it 100% every year? But I can tell you that, like, as a 36-year employee of CPS, that I would, if you went to my documents, you're gonna have to try to find a folder somewhere and hope that they're in there, and it's messier than we'd like it to be, right? And so that's one of the reasons this is so compelling to this work, is to try to get the data verifications up to speed and doing exactly what we need to do so that we have accurate data, and we have those files for every single employee and their dependents that are covered. So we want to make sure we're covering who needs to be covered, and we're not covering those who aren't eligible. And so that comes through that data verification process. We also are up to speed with COBRA and making sure that people who are on COBRA are the people who are supposed to be covered, and those who aren't or have expired their 18 months are coming off of that program, and that's happening now. We're obviously invoicing those people every month. And then I lastly want to point out that we're collaborating very closely with the Treasurer's Office and FinTech in all of these, because we really are in the same body of work in many ways. And so we've had monthly meetings with both of our teams, as well as weekly or bi-weekly treasurer and talent talks, where we're able to elevate these conversations that need to be, and where there are distinct overlaps, that we are able to address those as a team rather than in isolated pieces. And so the collaboration that we've had with FinTech and with Jen's lead has been really helpful for all of us, I think, in trying to get to an end of making sure employees are as whole as they can be with regard to not only benefits, but their whole entire employee experience. We will provide updates for you in the months to come. And so I just want to make sure you had a good background on what the audit was about and what we were trying to accomplish. And so in the future, we'll probably update you on the chart and where we are and as things happen, but wanted to lay some groundwork for where we were coming from.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions? Treasurer?
Just one. I know that early on there was issues on the collections of the COBRA payments.
Yes.
Can you give us an update on that, where that stands?
Yeah, yes, I can. So we have been working really hard. We were fortunate, about a year ago, we hired a new HR tech, and she's phenomenal, and she's very process oriented. You would love her. She is, and so she's done a really great job of creating a solid process for that. So we are 100% up to date. We feel very confident that the people who are on COBRA are supposed to be, and those who aren't. They're getting billed every month, and I think there are 12 people on COBRA right now, and those 12 are being billed monthly, and we're also expiring. If they're not paying, they're not on COBRA anymore. And so that's I feel like we're in a much different place than we were a year ago.
Any follow-up? Superintendent?
I just want to echo the work that's happening between the teams. That was an expectation that was set last year, and the teams have moved into making sure that that's occurring. One of the things that we've talked about quite a bit across the organization, and we're now beginning to see it come to fruition, is really having documented protocols for the work that we're doing. And so we're beginning to see that happen, such that if there is movement, if there is transition, you don't lose the historical information when individuals are not in the same spaces. And so I do appreciate the work that's happening, and we'll determine what cadence we're wanting an update in the meetings so that we can provide that update within that cadence.
Great. Do our guest from our Community Audit Committee have a comment or question? Feel free.
No, I don't. But,
Are you sure?
It's good to hear the progress.
Great. Thank you. With that, appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you. And we'll go on now, Treasurer.
Yes. So as always, we always start off with the general fund and then go into the state and federal grants. So I'll introduce Kevin Ashley. He's going to start us off with the general fund update.
Morning. Good morning.
Morning.
So we'll skip back, Rob, to number 4, slide 4. And then as we go through these, I'll highlight some of the things that are summarized at the beginning. So this shows you the cash balance at the end of August for the last 3 years. And as you can see, it's down about 30 million over last year. The primary reason for that is the higher level of expenditures that occurred at the end of the last fiscal year. as we've been talking about repeatedly. So just to show you, where that is in terms of encumbrances. This year it was 88 versus 107. I think a big part of that is the temporary appropriations. Some things have not been encumbered as of the end of August, but now that the final budget is approved, those will catch up. Next slide is revenue. This shows what our preliminary, amount was. The 596 is what we anticipate for the year. You'll see at this point we're up about 12 million. I think a big part of that is the property tax advances that have come in. Another thing though, so from year to year, if everything happened the same day every year, this would be so much easier to compare. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. So one of the things we do is the repay of advances from the federal grants back to the general fund. In prior years, we've kind of delayed waiting till federal grants were reconciled, final expenditure reports, that kind of thing. So we're trying to get on a schedule of doing those sooner. So in August, we did do the repay of advance, which was 13.3 million. So that shows up in this revenue. Compared to last year, that wasn't done until October, which is 19 million. So again, timing is an issue when you try to compare these items.
Before we move on, do you mind if I make a point?
Sure.
So you notice the big light purple is 596. That's the anticipated revenue for the year. And the budget that was just adopted was 609. So in the previous slide, that little cash block is going to get smaller at the end of this year. Just want to keep reiterating that.
Such a bundle of joy.
All right, the next slide just breaks it down by source. At this point, as I pointed out last month, the blue is the tax revenue. Again, we basically received half of our annual allocation. The other things will catch up and show up. But the green is going to be state revenue. Another thing I didn't mention today, but did before, in October, Ohio Department of Education will true up. And all of the funding updates should be included at that point. So we may see some changes with that. Again, the pink, that's where you're seeing the advance. Next slide. So again, if you recall, every year we have something, the change in school-wide pool we had to try to compare. The change in deductions of state funding was always a thing. Well, of course, we had to have something for FY24. So in going through the analysis, you'll see here the yellow bars. One of the things that is different this year versus last year, we were still paying payroll flex pay out of school-wide pool last year. And that's what this yellow really represents. At this point, about $20 million had been paid out of 598. Previously, we would transfer that from the general fund, so that it would be an expense out of the general fund and move it over. This year, we're not doing that. All the payroll is absorbed in general fund. So trying to compare, we kind of pulled that out to show that last year it was 67 million plus 20 million that was sitting in school-wide pool. This year, with all the payroll in general fund, we're looking at 73.8. Again, there's a lot of other timing issues that we saw, especially at this point. We did do the transfer out to classroom maintenance and repair fund, the 3.4 million. Again, it's a timing issue. Last year, that transfer was done later. It was actually done in October. Another thing is the United Way payment for CPP. Due to getting the final budget approved, we have not made a payment yet to United Way. So that will be happening this month or next, and that will catch up in terms of comparability. ITM lease purchase payments. We had large payments last year in July or August, and those have not been, I think, will be processed in September. So just to kind of highlight, again, it's kind of hard to compare. We're just trying to explain those and make it a little more understandable.
So is the reason why we couldn't be on the same cadence because we didn't pass the budget in June? Because I'm wondering if the reason that we don't see it as comparable is because it's a month off. Could we just do those activities at the same time every year? Could we just do them in October? Or is it dependent upon timing and for the budget?
So the lease purchase payments I just mentioned, those are set by a schedule.
Okay.
And it could just be they were processed at the end of August last year and the beginning of September this year. Those type of things.
Actually, those are being paid out of ESSER, so they won't show up in the general fund this year.
Okay.
Same thing with the transportation. Remember, we shifted 19 million of the budget into ESSER, so they won't show up here. You're looking at one fund. But your point is well taken that those annual transactions should be done in the same month each year.
I'm just wondering, was it because of the delay of the
Yes.
budget that was the
Yes.
primary?
We
Okay.
don't like to do things till we say yes.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm just
There's
wondering.
no budget to transfer to,
I-
too, so yeah.
So even with the temporary 90-day appropriation, that didn't allow for consistency? I'm asking, I'm not judging.
No, because remember, it was a 300 million, and we had 3 months of salary to save and pay out and benefits, and then all the vendors stuff that was coming through. We couldn't risk overspending that appropriation, so we delayed those things.
Thank you.
All right, and then the next slide, there, I guess then. So actually this, two are very similar.
You're on the tall.
Yeah, so this one shows it by source. This is a new graph from what we've done in previous months. Again, as we get further in the year, I think it'll be more meaningful. But it does show you the blue being the salary and benefits, so you can kind of see that comparison that I talked about. Green, other expenses, again, has those other things, and as Jen mentioned too, with the move to ESSER, is a difference there. All right, next couple slides are preschool expansion, the typical one. One of the things we wanted to point out here, we did calculate the tuition assistance based on a 3% increase. Actually, I should have waited till the next slide, but the next slide shows you the difference. Based on 3%, the tuition assistance calculates at $410,000. If we were to use 10%, which is what CPP is using, and as a comparable, if the district were to use that calculation as well, instead of 410, it would be 438. Then over the course of the year, it would be 7% of the annual.
But I wanted to point out that we built our budget based on the 3% because that was what was in the master agreement.
Yes.
The payment to United Way includes the 10%, with the caveat that doesn't get spent until a new master agreement gets written. We may have to do a budget adjustment so that our students get the same advantage of the 10% versus the 3% increase. If that were to come out, if that ended up in the master agreement. Does that make sense?
What would the cost be, or the increase be?
Remember the slide I did? Yeah, I'll have to pull it up. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I remember that chart. I was just wondering, is it significant? Like, is it?
It's a couple million, I think.
Yeah.
Couple of million for what?
Increase the CPU.
So, right. So if we were to increase our tuition value to the 10% number that United Way is proposing, our budget would have to increase by that new calculation because we only budgeted for 3%.
So, but as a result of the discussion and what have you from Monday night, what has been proposed by CPP is in the hands of the trusted entity known as United Way.
Not yet.
It will be, and it will stay there until there is a new master agreement that would allow that.
I spoke to General Counsel this morning about, because Monday night, the traditional method of us allocating money to them, this coming Monday night, in the treasurer's report will be that payment schedule. We pay them out quarterly. So it's the full value. The first payment is always really small because they use their carryover unspent cash to cover for that. But in order for them to prevent spending money as they go until we get, I don't know how long negotiations will last, he's going to do a temporary, I don't know if it's an MOU or whatever, to say that those monies need to be set aside until we come to an agreement.
Okay, so those monies will be set aside, but what we're saying is that we planned on 3%, because that's in the general agreement. They have proposed a 10%. So if they were to get their proposal through, in order for us to stay within what we projected, the young people, the little ones that are coming to CPS would have less, the less money than the people that are operating outside of CPS.
Correct. Unless we adjust our budget.
So one point of clarity, just so that
Please.
so that I'm sure that we're on the same page. So I was under the impression that we were setting that money aside, the $1 million, 1.5 aside in our budget, and it was not being transitioned over to United Way because we had not approved any changes in the master agreement, versus us transferring the money,
Okay.
and then United Way holding the money.
Okay.
Until we come to an agreement.
I think the documents probably cross paths. So what I can do is, it's already in the treasurer's report. I'll revise it on Monday, stating that fact.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions
I do have-
on this topic?
I do.
On preschool? Go ahead.
What can you explain the disadvantage for them holding the money versus us, or the advantage besides interest? Like I understood that it was going to be held, but I guess I want to understand what's the disadvantage for us giving it to them, for them to hold it, or us holding it.
Whoever controls the money can spend it.
But it's to be held, so no one's spending it. It's just being held. So I guess my question is, they can't spend the money even if they hold it. Is that because that's how it's written?
If I could answer that from my perspective, since I'm taking quite a good interest in all of this, it isn't to be transferred or handed over yet, because we're living by the general agreement. So that money, we are the caretakers of that money until we transfer to the trusted entity. And so that it's usually meant that when it goes to the trusted entity, then they have the opportunity to do what they need to do as the trusted entity. So we living by the general agreement, that money is still within our purview, our I won't say control, but protection, as we try to make the case that we're living by the general agreement. If we want to get the general agreement changed, that's another matter. So I think that's part of it. It's not to go there yet until the general agreement has been done, or there's an MOU, or what. So that makes me nervous too, another MOU. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think it's also just a cleaner process because we are, and I'll just use the term the fiduciary for the funding,
Yes.
because we are the fiduciary for the funding. When I made the recommendation, I made the recommendation under the pretense that we had to set that money aside as we were preparing to move forward, versus having to then forward money. We don't know. We believe that we're going to come to agreement, but we don't know if that agreement will be a $1.5 million agreement. So for us to then take those funds, advance, and then have to retract funds, it just makes for a not as clean process. And so doing this process just makes the process a lot more clean.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, I get it. I just have it sounds like control. So that was just, and you
We
said
are in
that.
control.
Well, fiscal agent, yeah, I got it. So that's fine.
Okay.
I didn't see a
Okay.
problem with that, but that's fine.
All right. So you want to go over the other page?
Yeah,
Back
so
one.
if you'll go back for me, Rob. Again, just showing the number of students
Oh, yeah.
that receive some assistance through tuition assistance is 839 at the end of August, compared to 722 the year
Right.
before. 35 the year before.
That's great.
Yeah, something to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing at the end of the month, preschool had a total enrollment of 1,600, and I believe Jen might have mentioned recently it's closer to 2,000.
I think so, but I can look it up.
Please look that up. Talk
That is
about
fun.
celebrating, and that's 2,000
Getting the little-
where? 2,000 in
All fun.
all funding, meaning with private providers and CPS?
No,
Or
just
just
CPS.
CPS? I like to clarify these things.
Can I,
Vice President Craig?
that's one question that also, and I know it's always something to champion in success. But as we think about our later discussion that we will be having,
Mhm.
you know, the thought process was that we would have a certain amount of students who would be within, who would need assistance and that therefore would be covered under the preschool promise. And that we've clearly exceeded that. And not likely to go below it anytime soon in the future. Because as we keep seeing, the numbers go up every so often. And so I think is that something that we are anticipating or expecting throughout the year that we will see more growth at the same rate or kind of in a steady rate, or is there?
Historically, I think Cincinnati Public Schools preschool peaks around the January-February timeframe. It just continues to grow until then. And then it stays flat or maybe reduces a little bit. But as of 3 o'clock this morning, we had
That's why you're keeping superintendent hours now.
These are automatic reports.
Oh, okay.
So we have, as of today, we have 1,772 preschoolers enrolled. We projected 1,819. I'm not sure where I got the 2,000 from. But so 1,700, but this time year we were lower.
Oh, yeah.
In total.
It'll be 2,000.
And if memory serves me correct, and I'll bring this report, or I'll publish a report here soon, but we spend about $10 million a year on preschool, all funding sources, including parent paid tuition. And only 6 or 7 million of it comes from the levy. So remember, the last dollar in, we invest a lot of last dollar, or first dollars.
Yes. I know you mentioned before that the actual budget for preschool was 19 million, roughly. But we're getting 15 million, is that right?
Combined is
Combined.
19. CPS plus CPP was 19.
Okay.
We only get 15 million in a year in revenue.
Okay.
So our little savings account is going to disappear very rapidly.
Sure. That's what I kind of wanted
Yes.
to clarify. That
Yes.
is when you said the budget was 19, it's for
Both
CP,
entities.
preschool programming across.
Yeah, it's on the next slide. You don't have the budget on there.
I hadn't loaded the budget at the end.
Oh yeah, because we just got the budget
Yeah.
approved, so we're in the process of
I
loading
got
it
you.
now.
I got you. I just wanted to make that connection that you just.
Yeah.
I think that's all for that section.
Okay. I think it's very clear, as has been the history in this district, whether it's preschool, Head Start, or whether this, or even talking in terms of half-day or full-day kindergarten, this district spends more money on early childhood than any other district in the state. And I think that's real with professional staff, with services and what have you. It's remarkable. But there's always been a commitment to early childhood in this district.
Well, and so one really nice benefit of all this is that we've been able to expand the preschool special education services to start serving children younger and
Yes.
and in the private providers, so that when they're getting to kindergarten in the public sector, they have already had the benefit of services they didn't used to get.
It's like that, it's that dashboard piece. It would be great to be able to push a button and say, this is all the money we spend on early childhood. And when you put all those special services in, it's not just what I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
And we can be really proud of that. Superintendent?
And I would just also add, while there is additional work for us to do in terms of the report card, you referenced the funding that we put in to start with. We currently, even though we did not increase in that particular area on the report card, we do currently still outperform all of the other Ohio 8 districts in early literacy. And I do think that very strongly that's a part of the work one of the reasons is because of the work that we've been able to do in pre-K. Because the students, the first one of the portions of their testing they're in pre-K because it's fall of kindergarten and they're in kindergarten for 2 months. before they're tested. So that really comes from the work that's happening in pre-K. So we'll continue to focus in that area because there is more work for us to do there. But in terms of all of the Ohio 8 districts, we are the highest performing in that area as well.
Vice President Craig, did you have a comment? Nope. Dr. Moffett? All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next up is Mr. Guston, our Assistant
Uh-oh.
Treasurer.
Here he comes.
Uh-oh.
No bad news.
And does call me the bad news person. She's giving you more
Somebody's
bad
got
news.
to do
for me.
it.
All right, Rob, if you could go to the next slide. All right, so if you remember the sheets, you have 2 sheets in front of you this time. So we're doing something a little different. 2 of these in your packet. 1 for each fiscal year. And I'll kind of explain that as we go. So first thing we want to talk about is fiscal year 23 grants. So those are grants we got last fiscal year. So if you think of a 15-month grant cycle, right? So traditionally you have July through June to do the work, and then you have 3 additional months to spend the money, pay out of the invoices, and settle it up, right? So we're in month 14 of that cycle. Our spending goal is 79% of the total allocation, not including ESSER. We'll talk about ESSER later, but 79%, and you just kind of have a grid there. So about half our grants have met the spending goal or exceeded it at this point. Our total spend percentage is about 70% as of the end of last month. Non-public, we're doing really well. So, I mean, obviously they're not our schools, but we still have a responsibility to help them manage their funds, their kids, and so they're doing quite well. Key activities obviously are just tying up things. So there's invoices out there. We're tracking down POs, tracking down extended time, doing those kind of last journal entries. Next slide, please. This is kind of the average spend graph. We're kind of right on where we were last year. I don't think we reported this last year, so it's kind of a new thing, but to go all the way through the end. Yeah, so you can see. All right, Rob, if you want to flip. Now we flip the page to 2024. So these are the grants we just got starting in July. And you'll see, this is month 2. We're trying to spend 11% at this point. You'll see the number of grants is lower, and that is the thing. They come at different times. State releases them to us, and then we have to put a budget plan together. And the treasurer and superintendent have to approve it, and then the state has to review it before we can start spending the money. And they trickle. There's a consolidated that gets the big ones, and then there's a trickle. So do that. Again, we're at about half the grants are at their spending goal for this time. Total overall, we spent 14% of our state and federal grants. If you want to flip to the next slide.
So before we move on,
Okay.
so just remind everybody, we created these monthly spending goals to prevent those huge carriers at the end of the year. And so it's having progress. So there was a lot of turnover the last couple of years, so it was kind of hard to keep that momentum going. But this is improving a lot. So
Hit the next slide. So you can. Yes. Yeah. So you can see this. This is actually a little better. It's less packed. You can see this is a 3-year trend. So we're up from last year and we're way up from 2 years ago. So that's good hard work from the grants team. And obviously the rest of the grant budget managers to get things together. So
right. The other decision that we made together was to keep the 2 instead of lumping everything into one report, keep the 2 years that are cycling together in separate reports. Because when the carryover money comes in, they was being dropped into this long report you were looking for, and it was hard to see how you were spending the carryover versus the new year stuff. So we're going to keep them separate and report them. I think it's easier to understand and manage.
All right. Any questions on state and federal? Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So this is the famous ESSER bar chart. As you can see, there's 4 boxes here. There's the 2 on the left are the overall grant from the time it started till now, and then 2 boxes on the right are basically what's happened since FY23. I would say all of these include encumbrances. So it looks like we're spending a little higher than they are, but it's spending plus encumbrances. And just to note that we will be closing out some encumbrances on the end of this current month. And then some of that money will get re-encumbered right away for projects. You want to go to the next slide, Rob? So this is a new one for us. I know we talk about ESSER as kind of just a single entity. It's really not. There are a series of different grants awards that we got, and so I just wanted to put this out here. You know, we'll keep updating this so you guys know. So you know, obviously ESSER 1 is done. ESSER 2 is about to be done, and we have about $20,000 that we need to spend out of that one in the next week or so, which shouldn't be difficult. And then you can see like ESSER 3, we have till the end of, we have through this entire fiscal year, I'll say that. Through this entire fiscal year, and then the ARP IDB and the ARP ESCE, those two are also ending. We've pretty much completely expended those out, which is what we want to do. So, any questions on that? And that is all I have for state and federal grants.
So then the CRAs are next?
Yes. You ready for CRAs?
Yep.
All right, Rob. Get the feeling you want me to go quicker. It should be in the same presentation. It should be in the You guys are like, hey, you guys are like, yep, let's go. All
We're
right.
going to start delivering food.
Right. All right. So, did you get the other slides for this or not? It's in the same presentation, Rob. I put all my stuff together.
What?
It's okay. I can talk.
So here's it there.
Yeah. Yes. I'm trying to be efficient. All right. There you go. Next slide. All right. So there are 5 CRAs for this time around. Approved by the board on Monday. You guys have the official document in front of you, but I just put them in a grid. 3 mixed use, 2 commercial office space. I don't know if there's anything exciting there, but do you have any questions? The one does say student housing. I'm like, that's not going to be CPS families. No. So maybe future CPS employees. How about that? All right. No. Yep. Any comments? Nope. All right. I understand. I understand. Yes. All right. If you don't mind, then we'll go to the allowable uses policy.
Now, is this our attempt to get something ready to send to policy committee? Or is this an explanation of how you operate? What is?
I think the first one.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of new to this one. So
Okay.
and I've kind of come in late to this, but so the genesis of this is board policy 6233 is amenities for participants at meetings and other occasions, which came up to, I think the question was hey, how can we buy food and what can we buy food
Well,
from?
there you go. Let's just
Right.
get right to it.
That's where it
what
started.
should be entitled.
That's where it started from. But then the question people said, well, okay, food's fine, but what about this? And what about this? And what about travel?
Well, and then the elimination of school-wide pool can cause a lot of issues
Be careful
because
what you say.
I know. But so once the school-wide pool was created, the funding lost its naming conventions, and so the spending rules relaxed. When you go back without school-wide pool, the spending restrictions are defined by each fund, and so we had to re-educate everybody on which fund, what you're allowed to do with which fund. And the team spent like a year putting this together because it's very comprehensive.
Yes, I was going to say this was, yeah. So like Jen said, every fund and grant has some rules attached to what you can spend the money on. And so the question is, how do we educate the stakeholders? Because you got people at the schools trying to put in requisitions and contracts and getting frustration. So a collaborative effort. I want to give a shout out to Joseph Porter, the accounting operations manager. He spearheaded this, and it was a year's worth of work. I think. Cody was part of the. Lauren, we had Cody, we had
internal audit
Lauren.
helped
I'm just
a lot.
looking at it. We had a lot of people involved. Go to the next slide, Rob. And we came up with this document, which is the allowable expenses guideline. I think you guys have a printed copy. But the concept is simple. That left-hand column is what you want to buy, so a thing. And then from there, each column is the different fund source and then whether it's allowable or not. It is a living document, so there's a lot of hyperlinks in there. You don't quite get that in the printed version, but there are hyperlinks to board policies, there are hyperlinks to forms, there are hyperlinks to ORC when necessary. So a lot of nice pieces.
We try to make it as user-friendly from the user's perspective because they usually say, oh, can I buy t-shirts? Well, they don't want to search through a whole bunch of guidance, so we started with their topics and then showed them it's allowable under these funds or never allowable, like gift cards, never.
Yeah, there's some fun ones in there. Gift cards, alcohol, alcoholic beverages.
Gas cards.
Yes. Never, 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 never. You'll get the hint, but there's stuff about tipping and like the 15% tipping rules that we have to follow. All right, so Rob, next slide. I think there's two parts to this, I think. I mean, one is, I think the document's ready to be rolled out to the CPS world. You know, and I think that'd be a good support for all the folks around the financial area. But we would also like to update the policy to incorporate the use of that document so it is in policy. And obviously the document, like I said, it's a living document. It will change. You don't want to put that in policy because, you know, state comes up a new guideline. Hey, you can use title for t-shirts. We'll go update it. They're not going to, but we'll go update it, right? But we want the policy to basically refer back to the allowable expenses guideline.
I do have one question, and I think it's important. First, let me say I think it's really great that we actually have a document that folks can go back and reference, and that it's, from what I'm looking at the live version, looks a lot cleaner and clearer for someone to be able to appreciate and recognize. I think the one struggle that I think also happens is when we have a number of things where people are using multiple fund sources to do activities or events. And while I think we are doing a great job of educating and making sure that our schools have folks who are understanding better how to manage their funds, I still think that's going to be a challenge when it comes to, well, can I use this? Well, can I use that? Well, can I use this then? And so is there a method of having the conversation with a person when they're saying, I'm not sure if I can do this, how I would go about it?
So one of the things we've been trying to do over the last 9 years is to change the culture of the treasurer's office to be more of a frontline partner, to have those conversations before people start entering or spending and that kind of stuff. And so the accounting team has touch points now with their schools to help build those relationships so that it's an easier conversation to have. And we're actually going to be starting, you'll see this in a little bit, we're going to be starting this Budget Geek Squad just for that very purpose. So, yeah. So we're trying to be more of that partner rather than the compliance hand slap type thing.
I think I would also add, and I know we talked about this ahead of time, and we are beginning to use this to share it with schools. Actually, it probably started before then, but I do know that there was quite a bit of review last year with schools on what was allowable and what was not. And this particular document has made it even more streamlined in terms of that. I think the only recommendation that I would make as we are making a request to policy is that we update not just the allowable expenses guidelines, but update it so that it covers an administrative guideline with that includes the allowable expenses. Because to Board Member Craig's point, there are some other areas that go along with that schools need to adhere to that are not just about the allowable spending. So that may be one way to allow both of those to go in and become a part of the policy if the policy committee supports it.
And then the second question, or really just kind of thought around this, is at some point, folks should be using this as they develop their budgets. And I think that's something we're going to do going forward. And I guess, is there a plan to kind of lead that discussion in the early part of the budget process around recognizing what are your allowable things you can spend? So if you want to do beard shirts, you got to put it into this section here, not into this. So when you're building your budget, think about that as you're doing it, or is that kind of how the conversation would be expected to go?
That's the intent, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think we do a lot of reviews, obviously, before the budget gets to the final thing, but obviously the more we can get at the very beginning of that process, the better it will be.
About investing in the front side of life instead of the back side.
Yeah.
The more you can, do the front side of this, the better the decisions will be and be able to be justified. Let's go ahead.
I just want to say thanks for all this hard work. I've been one of the people that have been I've been on the vendor side of this and had to deal with contracts and working with schools and them not having clarity. And then I've been on this side of it where, and complained to you all and shared what I learned and experienced, and you all are really actively working on it. So I want to say thank you for getting us this far, because this is hugely, exponentially further than where we've been. And I know we have a lot of ways to go, but I believe, in all honesty, awareness is key. If we give our buildings, everybody the information that they have about what the treasurer's office deals with, about what you all are having to see and manipulate, it takes some of that pressure off, but then it just makes it more efficient for all of us.
So it really is dual purpose, because one of the complaints feedback we received back is that, well, my accountant from last year let me do it with these funds. The accountants from this year are saying no. And so one of the things that we're struggling with is our standardization of how we handle things within the department.
Yeah.
And so this document is the document that everybody should follow. So we'll be more consistent in the way we help people and pre-educate people as they go forward.
And I know you all said this has taken a year and that it's not done and you've got more work to do, but I think this lends itself to the CPS historical perspective of being trendsetters and innovative across the state. So I think this is like something that other districts need to see, that this is what's going on and how they could be more useful with their grant education too. So don't stop here. And thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
I'll just
Yes, go
also
ahead.
add that this also goes back to our overall focus on standard operating procedures.
Yeah.
Having a consistent way and changing the way that business is done, and that's sometimes uncomfortable, but it does allow for more information up front. So in the end, when there are challenges, it removes the area of gray. And over the last year, that's something that we've really worked on, because we know that there have been some gray areas to the example that our treasurer is giving. So it's something that is a continued work in progress, but it does work to change practice.
So as we move on, this is going to come in some sort of form policy. And then obviously the administrative guidelines are part of the chart and all that stuff. That doesn't have to be in the policy.
No.
So we'll be able to anticipate the policy. They might get it next month.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then the next policy?
So let me introduce you to Cody Hutchins. This is his first time presenting, so
Hey, Cody.
nice.
He has a different
We will
hairdo
not bite
today,
you.
too.
He might bite, but we
He has a different kind of hairdo.
Tried to look my best for
I
today.
know. You put a
He's
little-
getting married next month.
Yeah,
I know. Letting the beard come back till she tells me to shave it off
There
again.
you go.
he'll be clean shaven
Yep. Next month I'll be a little
Just
different.
keep the tan even, that's all.
That's
he
the
has to worry
key.
about.
We can't give you a gift card for your.
Well, according to Loud News,
Excellent.
that's not allowed.
Excellent.
Thank you for letting me speak today. What I bring to you, contractor versus employee. So this stemmed from a project of in-source versus outsource team that consists of myself, Jen, Chief Burkhart, Chief Gollahue, and Dan Hoyne. And what we really wanted to do was provide clear guidance to the district and then people that are looking at whether a contract that we have is considered a contracted employee or it could be considered an employee, for talk of return on investment and bringing in insourcing a position or outsourcing a position. So what this tree does, it really just breaks down the IRS guidelines, the way to really break down what an independent contractor versus employee looks like. The main test that is used typically in the world is the IRS 20-question test, which you'll see on the backside of this document. So as most things come from the IRS, they're not always easy to understand and easy to interpret. So what the attempt here was to just give a free-flowing flow chart that just helped make that decision a little bit easier and show the CPS financial control, behavioral control, and the relationship that we establish with an independent contractor to decide whether that position could be an employee or should stick as an independent contractor. And it also breaks down some facets of the pension contributions to CSRS and helps with that, and really breaks that down to an easy, well-mannered kind of way to follow that process. So.
Now, will this evolve into a policy?
That is my understanding, the goal of this. First, bring it here.
I need to talk to Dan about the appropriateness of putting it in a policy or not. But because we started this whole contract review, ROI, and the in-source outsource thing, we wanted to keep you updated as to our progress, and that we haven't quite figured out who is going to be the gatekeeper on this decision tree. I mean, is every director going to be responsible for doing it themselves, or is there going to be a group of people that review it and approve it? We haven't gotten that far yet, but we just wanted to make sure that you saw that we're making progress, and that we've actually used the most recent, the call center, bringing the call center back in-house, and then Jeremy's technology positions that are being brought back in-house. We use those as case studies to help this.
Okay. So we wouldn't necessarily anticipate this going to policy at the same time that this other one would be.
Correct. Yeah, we're not ready to move forward with that yet.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
So I actually love this because this is my wheelhouse of law school experience here. Is I love labor and employment law. And so
you're gonna regret that you said that.
I love it.
You like it? You like it?
But I think one of the things I maybe have a question about it is in the process of reaching out to contract for services. I think this also should be part of that conversation as to when you're doing that, what is the job you're contracting for? What are the things that we're going to be controlling and how they operate? Because I do think that to some of the points that Board Member Bolton's made over the last couple of years, that there are some positions that, literally we almost could dictate them doing these different tasks. It really could be just a employee of the district. If we're not having that conversation when we're kind of contracting out those services, are we doing what's best to get people in those positions? Because while some partners have been able to grab folks, and I'll use the example that I think Board Member Bolton will appreciate, is something like our crossing guards, where it's a position that we somewhat could dictate some of those roles and the work they do. We haven't done that in the past, and so maybe that's a question. Well, as you're reaching out for services, especially things that would happen within the building, or things that we would really dictate the total workload. So it would be someone would fall into someone where you'd have to contribute anyway.
And that's our hope, right? And right now, because we're just at the infant stages of the whole contract in-source outsource ROI thing, it's kind of at the end of this stuff. We're trying to move this stuff since the beginning of the conversation. The difficulty is in putting this into practice for what you just said is the time between board meetings. Because we're decentralized in our financial management, directors or department heads or school principals can enter a contract and it gets into the treasurer's report. In order for us to do what we're implementing this, we're going to have to slow that process down a little bit to give that time review, which kind of works against our productivity measures, right? And so that's why I said we're not quite ready to move it forward yet. We need to kind of think through those things. The point well taken. That's the intent.
And I also think that one more point to discuss is the change in paradigm for some of the positions that we may be looking at in terms of this. So as we started with the recommendations for this year and shared that information with the board, it made sense. It made sense to bring the call center back. There was really good information for why we needed to do that. The same with the positions in terms of the recommendation for the IT team. It was a cost savings for us. It made good financial sense for that to happen. But I also know that there have been conversations about other positions over the course of the years that have been outsourced for specific reasons. And so I think that we also want to use this as guidance around whether or not we can really do that, or we should really do that based on what the IRS legislation or guidance is, and then come back with more conversation around that. So that's another part of the conversation that requires us to have a pretty deep dive.
Makes sense.
So we thought we would start, once this was agreed upon and everything, we would start with like the really large contracts that we have. and just running them through this decision tree, like the Hamilton County. We pay $6, $7, $8 million a year for Hamilton County for a bunch of different roles. So let's look at them to see whether they are better in-source or outsource. The nurses is another issue, right? So that's what we thought. We'd start with the big things and then move forward.
Yeah, over time, people have spent a lot of time talking about how it's so much cheaper to outsource because you don't have so many other kinds of things. And I think over time, that's not necessarily been true in the last half a decade or more now. I mean, certainly 10, 12 years ago, it made complete sense to do as much outsourcing as you could. Now it's not quite there. Plus, our need for personnel to do multiple things is growing. And I just think that whole crossing guard, people that are that devoted to do that, wow, it's all part of the school community. The kids know those kids, those guys and gals, and they could be doing other things within our buildings, and maybe they would like additional whatever. And I think we need to be able to schedule it rather than the city. And I think this is good stuff to worry about and fix, part of the re-envisioning.
And to your point also, is it really an outsourced position if we control all the work, so therefore we have to pay benefits?
Right.
Is that true? Is that truly an
Everything.
outsourced position, or is that really saving us any dollars at that point?
It's not. It can't possibly be.
I was going to
It's
ask a
just a
question
joke,
about after some point. I remember that you and I have had this conversation. We end up having to pay like the Social Security or the retirement for some of our contractors after so long. So to your point, Board Member Bolton, maybe for a short term, 3, 4, 5 years, it's beneficial. But then if we have to start having a significant outpour of money, it may not be.
So it's not related to time, but it's related to whether it's the traditional role of the school district and how much control you have over that. Are they really in the eyes of the IRS and the retirement board an employee?
Okay.
So if you if you provide them with an office, if you give them day-to-day direction, if they perform something that every school district has, then in the eyes of the retirements, like our bus drivers, in the eyes of retirement, we pay. So we work into their vendor contract their SERS portion of the retirement.
Okay.
We have to process that, so it costs us money to collect that money and then process it. It's when you get to the onesie-twosie people, and so this happens many 10 years ago or more. There was a contractor that worked in the treasurer's office, and on a technology project, and after 3 or 4 or 5 years, we ended up hiring that person as an employee. And then when that person left the district, when she went, so I've been the beginning date is a contractor.
Oh, okay.
And so we ended up having to back pay a lot of that retirement. And so, we've gotten caught a couple times in those scenarios. We've gotten better at it as we go. But this will help formalize that and control it a lot better.
That's what I was going to ask. Does this process, implementing this process, help us with existing contracts and catching that now? Not an audit. I don't want to add more work to you, Lauren, but I'm just saying, does it help us where we are? It's going to help us moving forward, but where we are, does it catch? Will it be able to catch?
That's what we want to do. So, and now that we have this finalized for the most part, we want to start looking at those contracts that could be susceptible. Not just as an in-source, outsource to save money, but also these other IRS and retirement issues.
Okay.
And make decisions and recommendations about whether to continue the way we're doing it or to change.
Okay.
I would say too, the outsourcing, insourcing it's a philosophical as well as strategic, tactical thing that was used to try to dismantle the public sector. I mean, let's just be real. They were trying to reduce the number of people that were in the public sector, in public sector unions, and indeed put those folks into the private sector and for profit or for whatever. But it's the same kind of battle we've been. So whatever good came of it, I'm sure that was good, but it's no longer, to the superintendent's point. You look at this, it really isn't any cheaper, and you actually have less discretion and less viable ways to use the wonderful people that we have. Okay. Continuing,
Yes.
budget,
Budget.
the B word.
So as Finance Chair Bolton said in the board meeting, that as soon as this budget and the reality check happened, we needed to start working on the next cycle of the budget. And I think she was quoted to say October 1st. So I put together, I'm sorry, can you start with the timeline, Rob? It's a PDF document. It's called Fiscal Year 25 Budget Cycle Timeline. So as he's bringing that up, so kind of some key things that we wanted, so that towards the end of the budget process, the treasurer's office, budget-related people, we went off and had a retreat. What went well? What didn't go well? What do we need to think about? How do we need to change? What kind of timeline do we want to follow? And we came up with, you don't have it? Yes, I can. No, it's my bad. I probably failed to send it to you. In the 8,000 documents I had to send to you today. Sorry, I can't talk and do this at the same time.
It's all right, take your time.
We're here for 5
Dinner
hours.
will be here.
I was gonna say, we're here for 5 hours.
Well, anytime anybody wants to leave the committee and go do another one, it's all right. Policy. That was an interesting
too.
meeting today, yeah.
Okay, send it to you. Okay, so what we thought we would do is establish what we call a budget committee structure. So there'll be a steering committee that superintendent and treasurer will lead together with Chief Little and Mr. Guston, and then a series of committees that go underneath that to focus on different areas of the cycle. We also are in the process of revising our equity allocations documents and plans. We want to start the state and federal grant process at the same time. Traditionally, we've started the general fund, and as we get 80% through, then we start on Title I, but they have to be done together to help the school's budget better. So we're going to do a parallel process. Last year, we were unable to do the pre-workshop that we did with the board to establish what the budget priorities are going to be, so we want to reschedule. I think that it's scheduled for October. Yes, I have it noted on here, the 14th, yes.
Last October, budget was kicked off of that agenda.
Right.
That cannot
Well,
happen
you were
again.
doing goals and guardrails.
Well,
at
we've
the
got
time.
those now, so we
Yeah.
can move on.
Okay. So we have a team that's looking at improving the LFU reporting. You know, it was our first year using it the way we were, so we have a lot of ideas on how to improve the reporting out of that. We've already created a budget webpage to improve transparency around everything we do budget. And we just haven't made it live yet because we wanted to start it with a new cycle. But, you know, here's our timeline. These are the formulas we're using for staffing. These are the allocations. These are the board priorities, superintendent's priorities, and have all the report out there, all the engagement opportunities we have with the financial town halls or other budgetary related engagements. Just so there's one page for everybody to go to get the same information and hear the same word. So I created this little draft timeline that starts, we've already started planning, of course, but the committees will be established and kind of kicked off by the end of September. And then highlighted in blue are all the board meetings up until the end of the year because, thank you, Mr. Foote.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Because the board meetings for next calendar year haven't been established yet, but as soon as we get those down, we can start, you know, tagging them for presentations. But the first major step that we need to do is start looking at the staffing formulas and determining what changes we want to make for the next cycle.
Well,
And then,
excuse me, but do mention in there regarding contract negotiations.
Correct. They will start in December, January, I believe.
And,
Yes, I did
and
left
when
that
you're
off,
talking,
so
yeah,
CBA.
I would put that in there because, you know, you can't negotiate in public, but I will say that, I would hope that everybody is ready to do all kinds of revision and recalculating and rethinking, much of many aspects of the contracts that we have to get our maximum effort for our employees and for our students.
So we would hope to have formulas changed by November 1st. The student projection
And
process,
that won't happen because of negotiations.
but it doesn't mean we can't have a temporary agreement for a year. I don't know. What?
No, I'm loving this conversation. No, I think everything has to be out in the air.
Yes. So the student projections, you know, everything's based off of student projections. That process kicks off on October 15th, and will end on November 1st. This year there'll be the normal appeal. Last year we ended up, I think, skipping the appeal process because everything was delayed start. But so we'll reestablish the appeals process on the student projections before they actually do the initial staffing based on those projections. And then, so the initial staffing should be complete for internal review on the 17th, just to make sure everything looks right before we publish them to the schools on the 30th, which will be a whole month before they're not used to seeing it. There's a board meeting on the 4th, so we can give an update then. Early in December, we will do training to the school, the ILTs, and the LSDMC, so everyone wants to participate. And I've noted in green the Finance Committee conversation, you know, those dates. But having said all that, once the schools get kicked off, then central office will kick off on January 23rd. And then we have to have a budget approved by June 30th. I hope to God we don't have to do another temporary appropriation.
Yeah, we'll be good.
So right below that document is an example of the committees that we all came up with, and Mike made this beautiful word chart. Keep scroll down just a little bit. There you go. And so all these committees will work on and then report up through the steering committee so that we have a lot of work to do in a very short time frame. Any questions about what timeline?
Sure. Superintendent?
I think the only thing to add, as we talked about this earlier, is the continued conversation around a closer period of time between the school budgets and the central office budgets. Because one of the challenges that we had with budget this year and you know, having worked on budget quite a bit, is when it came time to make updates, to make corrections, to make changes, we were put in a position because we had wherein there were some things that could have been done differently at schools. Because we had already done that, closed that chapter and moved forward, we could only do that from the central office, and that did not allow us, honestly, to be the most efficient. And so I think that as we move forward, there's a lot of work that has to go into before we even get to this phase, because we have to deal with the $85 million deficit.
That's the next slide,
as
yeah.
well. So I do think that a part of the conversation is also, and we'll have to just revisit that and talk about it again, that closer period together, because looking at it more holistically will allow us just a greater deal of efficiency.
Well, we can certainly parallel those, and I forgot that we talked about that, so I apologize. But you're right, we can kick off central office at the same time we do schools. It's going to make it harder on our internal team to support, but, you know, because there's only so many accountants to go across. How many budget units do we have? Yeah. 30 something.
Wow.
So it's a lot for a small team of accountants to support, but we'll figure something out. Okay, so I'm sorry, was there any other questions?
Yeah, we've got some questions.
One other question really quickly on the committees, which I actually like this idea of building up, but the idea behind the committees is also just to bring in suggestions around areas to, or I guess more my question here is the role of the committees to kind of bring up areas to be aware of and to be concerned about, and areas where there might be efficiencies or things like that would come up through that process that then is taken back into the full budget rollout with both central office and schools.
So one example of that is, yes, the staffing committee is going to look at all the staffing formulas, do the analysis, make recommendations back up to the steering committee on what those are, and then we'll float those through the board. We have a different committee that's going to work on the Geek Squad. So how are they going to organize and all that kind of stuff? How are they going to do support? One that's improving reports. So it's not the same people in every committee, like one giant committee. And so that was the best way we thought that we could organize our work so that it's happening at the same time and be ready when we kick off.
I'd just like to say a couple things. Few things. I think they're having parallel structure at least, but two things that have come up have been having an actual district budget instead of school budget and central office. And I know that technically, mechanically, that's not possible, but I think it would be reasonable to think about it. I also think that because negotiations won't be done with the master contract in the timeline that this is talking about, you're probably at least going to have to work from within the established equations or formula that are in those contracts. And what came up in the March meeting, in that late night meeting, was that there was a commitment, I thought, and I think, to at least reduce class size. We found out you can't do it in this previous budget, but there was you could phase it in. And I know I think my understanding was even an attack that they're going through now, there was an effort to try to at least do something. So I think you almost have to kind of plan on those negotiations not being done, because as we've found out, a significant portion of whatever's in this budget is out of those contracts and mandated by those contracts. And you're not going to have a contract done this early. You might use this as some of the thing that you want to see changed in contracts. But that's part of the reality. And the other piece is, I think this committee kept coming up too, that, and I think there is an interest on the board's part to see how the money manifests itself in the schools. And it's not just about school budgets, but we'd like the community to be able to see it. The other thing that's still intriguing me, and I know we've worked so hard on about the equity concept and the equity wheel and the equity equation or whatever, I think the board was, at least I was fascinated, maybe somebody else was too, about the difference between the adaptive and also the technical. If there's a way to look at the equity, divide it that way, it's established, and that you start to build in the equity plan based upon those two categories. I like this a lot, and I'm excited about it, as long as it's not the same people talking to each other in all these different committees.
There is some overlap, but not completely.
Well, because I will say, and this goes back to several administrations, 8, 9, 10 people sitting in the room, the superintendent's conference room or whatever, talking about mostly, thank goodness, sort of instruction. And then everything else gets built. There has to be a better and earlier way. So I'm excited about you all trying to plan this, but your contract negotiations aren't going to be over.
So I want to caution one thing that you said about using the range in the staffing, because the CBA is very clear about what number when a new teacher is added, and adding a teacher is what's going to reduce the class size. So you can't, it's not the range. What the range does is whether the pair is there or not, or whether pay is there or not. The CBA is very clear about when a new teacher gets added.
Yes, and that's language that has to obviously be out, if possible. And that's the negotiations that have to take place. But the range, it doesn't make any sense any longer, except for the money piece, which is important, obviously, next year more so than ever. Doesn't make any sense to take the top number or the number right before you need a para to determine how many teachers you're going to have. It doesn't. It may make great financial sense because it's less dollars. It just doesn't make any sense anymore because something we have to do because to move the district. So I'm within that range.
Superintendent, want to respond?
So just to add in terms of thinking about that for this year, one of the things that I asked the team to do this year, which they did in the TAC process, to your earlier point, was to run the numbers two different ways, run the information two different ways. So where feasible, and the main challenge, and our treasurer is correct, it is written in the contract that way. Yeah. But at the same, there are two things that we're working with at one time, and both things are also true. One, our goal is not to lose any teachers at all. Right. And so that's one that's really important. And the second is to also recognize that we're not hiring paras. We have many para vacancies, so we can add paras, but we're not hiring as many paras right now. And so thinking about that this year in the TAC process, it did allow us to begin to look more at the class size, where it only impacted about 8 or 10 particular classrooms, but that's 8 or 10 classrooms that otherwise this time last year would not have been impacted. So it may be a decision that we made in terms of that's not necessarily what's written in the document, but it's what's best for the kids. And so that's one of the reasons that we made that decision this year. So I think that that's a gradual way to start the conversation. And then it did also allow us the opportunity to show good faith in terms of thinking about what those roles were. And so I think it was either 8 or 10 positions that, because of that change in number, we didn't, add additional positions that we know that we can't fill at this point, but we did add the teaching position, and with the hopes that we're able to, do some movements. There are some positions that we, for obvious reasons, we just can't keep them in the places where they are, because in many of the instances, they're way off from where they should be, and a lot will have to change. And historically, the data doesn't show that they get the increases by the end of the year or the middle of the year or any of those things. But that's one step closer in getting to where we're looking at. But I think that we wanted to make sure that there was information that showed that we were being thoughtful about where we were going with an overall process. We also talked about the same thing that you shared, making sure that the individuals on the committee, if it's the same people on the committee, then there's not a need for all of the additional committees if the same people are doing the conversation. So we talked about that also. So at least it gives an option to show how we're thinking about working through the process, even if we have to move some of the anticipated dates to make sure that we get where we need to be in terms of the other areas.
I'm very encouraged by the plan, and it's true that our entire instructional infrastructure is built around 2 or 3 paragraphs in the CFT contract that have been there for well over a decade. We don't have the paras that we used to have. People aren't doing it. We are paying overload in some instances. There are other ways that we can attract employees, keep employees, give people beneficial kinds of jobs for the kids and for themselves. But the reality is our effort, our infrastructure has to radically change. It really does.
Thank you. All right, Rob, can you go to that other document that you had up earlier? So I'm calling this the Cliff Tracker. So what I'm attempting to do is identify, I started just looking everything that was in ESSER that was a recurring cost and what that cost was, so that we can keep track of those decisions about what we're going to do about it. And then as conversations we're having in public meetings and topics that were coming up, I started adding things to them. So at the very top, you see the first thing on there is, what's the cost of the new CBA negotiations going to be, aka what COLA, and then any new things in a CBA. And then, so going across across the document, we want to tie everything we're doing to a goal or a guardrail. What's the dollar value? What's the scope for next year? What's the per pupil cost using our Edgenomics training? What funding source can we get? I'm going to create a drop-down list of things. And then what's the trade-off? So if we want to bring nurses back in, what size are the nurses going to be? Where's that funding going to come from? So this is a document just to keep track of everything. I just wanted to go over the topics in case I've missed anything important. But anything that comes out of the ad hoc committee, whatever those recommendations are, we have to figure out how we're going to fund them. The facility major repair plan that's going to be shared here shortly. The new COPS payment, if that's what one of the tools we choose to do, we're going to have to make sure we have budget money to pay for that lease payment. When we looked at the smaller class sizes at the request of Chair Bolton last winter, that the increase in cost, net increase in cost was $13 million. We then looked at, as a result of this late summer conversation, what would the class size be at 4 to 6 if we maxed it at 27? Now, this was still based on projected numbers, not the TAC numbers, so we're recalculating it based on actual enrollment, but it was about 2.9 million. The preschool expansion, any new strategic initiatives that come out of the strategic plan that's not can't be use existing money or anything new. Are there any grade level expansions? Like for a while, you know, LEAP was growing and Kansas growing 1 grade at a time, so that's a new cost to the budget. School program changes. I just added this Monday night, the Public Safety Academy and the career education expansion from last couple meetings ago. What would that cost? Then everything, here's all the things in the cliff. So the cliff right now is totaled. I don't have this document finished. I don't have a total, but this is a work in progress. I just wanted to share this with you and we're going to keep it in the public eye as often as we can, because we always forget, right? I've been talking about this cliff for, what, 3-4 years now, and it's still a shock. So this is my attempt at the cliff tracker and how we're going to use these decisions to establish budget priorities before we allocate the first dollar out anywhere else. This is the kind of document I want to share. I was hoping that we could talk about at the board workshop and kind of get some consensus about the scope of some of these harder, difficult items. Questions? Comments? Superintendent, I'm sorry.
No, I'll just say I think this is good to have it in front of us, and I think it's also important with this recognizing that some of these things we absolutely are going to value and think are important, but then that means we have to be, to use Board Member Bolton's term or Chair Bolton's term, courageous enough to say this is something we're keeping, so therefore something else must go. And I think that's going to be a really hard conversation that the board has to lead. So I appreciate you putting this together for us.
So sometime soon, I'm gonna develop a temporary draft initial budget target. I was kind of hoping waiting till ODE to catch up because, you know, based on their calculations, it may have to change. We don't want to wait for a November forecast, which is typically how we set the budget target. But because things are changing, I want to recalculate and come up with a kind of a temporary proposed. So it just gives us a launching point. And then talk about what are all the things you can't cut. Like you can't cut the debt payments, you can't cut the Hamilton County audit fees, you can't cut our liability insurance. And so those things are like, should be taken off the top. And so we start talking about what are discretionary funds. Then you do the trade-offs. So I'm hoping the next time we get into either a board meeting, probably instead of waiting until finance in October, maybe one of the early October meetings, we'll be able to have that part of the conversation. We can update on this as well.
Yeah, I you know, you always get the non-poker face whenever I see stuff like this. So I'm appreciative of the information. I just want to suggest as well that for some of the things, what would be helpful for me when we do have these conversations as a board and whenever the retreat is, to have things that we have to do. So like I'm just giving the Promise Center as one, in that there's Ohio Revised Code that we have. It doesn't have, the facility doesn't have to look like what we have, but it has to exist. So is there an opportunity that if we had that tied to a link there for like the Ohio Revised Code saying what we have to do, but and then what we currently do, maybe we could generate that conversation and like ad hoc to say, okay, well, it doesn't have to be a complete building, but maybe we could save money someplace else. So that would be really, really helpful for me. Another question that I have is, are there, and I don't know exactly if it would be admin or treasurer that answer this, but we know we've got these cliff items. I'm thinking specifically like school nurses, technology, athletics, summer scholars. Are there any initiatives to seek grant money or partnerships for those now? So like when I see technology is 16 million, what is that? Like what can we have like some idea? Is that lease payments? Is that, or maybe just a drop down to say, hey, this 16 million, 10 million of it is the computers, 5 million of it is servicing, so that we can get an idea of, hey, maybe we can cut 5 million, but we really got to keep 10 million.
Right, so all that detail's in the ESSER budget document line by line.
Okay.
I just lumped it here to
got
save
you.
space, but certainly we can do that. But that $16 million is, remember when Kevin was doing his presentation, our expenses are down. Part of it was technology because we moved it to ESSER.
ESSER.
So yeah, we might have to rethink whether, do we want one-to-one devices for every student in the district? Is that still working for us? If it's not being used that way, then we shouldn't need to invest in it, but Superintendent wants to say.
Yeah, I think the other thing to add that we've also discussed is when we come in the October session, a part of our goal is to bring some of the things that we would be recommending as a way to start thinking about this $85 million cliff. And so this was the beginning of kind of that running record. But to Board Member Moffitt's point, when we think about the technology, for example, we have to make a concerted decision as to whether or not we're going to continue with the one-to-one the way that we do it or not, because that's what a huge part of that is in terms of the lease payments that we pay for the technology, and to give our students, the students that don't have access to Wi-Fi, we still cover that Wi-Fi cost. So we're also having, and we'll be able to bring more data around it, but I'm also having the team to run what is the usage right now that our students use Wi-Fi outside of the school day, because that might also allow us to have some additional conversations. The third piece to that is it also gives opportunity to think about what we may talk to the city about, because that's really a utility kind of issue or concern at this point. The Wi-Fi is just not specific to CPS. It gives Wi-Fi to everyone in the home. And so thinking about if there is a way, to work through some of those. So yes, to your question, we are thinking about opportunities for grants across the board. Last year, we were able to gain about $4.3 million additional dollars in grants, and only $900,000 of that was from the governor's grants for security. So the rest of that were grants that we actually applied for. But there are some areas here, anywhere that we can look where we can get additional grant funding. We're exploring those things. I just don't know how much of that we'll actually be able to actualize or count or depend on by the time we get to the conversations we need to have around budget.
Thank you. So what would be helpful for me is just to have like a, rollover or something that when I go over here, I can kind of see the details of that. It doesn't have to be a separate report for me. I just kind of want to look at hey, this is an area, this is a personnel cost, because I'm looking at like our APs of culture. We've got almost 1.5 million just in the Title High schools. That's personnel. Those are people. So I'm assuming those are people.
So Joe, you saying you want the level of detail about like which schools they're in?
No, but just like that's a personnel person.
It's 11. I think it's 11 people.
And so I can just understand, hey, this particular item is encompassing X number of things, not necessarily the granular specifics, but that if we were to cut maybe instead of 16, let's look at 5 million, or let's let so we can, I think as board members, it would be helpful for me to see what that makes up on a higher level.
Okay.
And then, because I do know when we speak of partnerships, Altifiber is one of our major partners, but there's also a huge thing in
Our
the city.
vendors.
Well, they're vendors. But this is very true. They are our vendors. But I believe they partnered with, was it TAF? Okay. And so
They spent more on that PR out of
yeah,
that.
they probably did. They probably did.
But
But I'm wondering if, I know I live in Avondale, and Avondale as a community, the city is putting Wi-Fi in neighborhoods. So maybe that's something that we look at, and when what I'm asking for has a point in that if technology is 1 million in Wi-Fi, maybe then at our next meeting we talk, or before then, we talk to the city to say, hey, maybe we can save that 1 million because Wi-Fi is accessible to their neighborhoods. So that's just what I'm thinking of with regard to, and it just could be on the sheet, but as a rollover, it doesn't have to be separate.
I would hesitate to, and I appreciate what you're talking about, Jen, about starting to get some kind of target. I would stay away from that with a 10-foot pole for the beginning of this discussion. I think the board is unaware of what is about to happen and the size of decisions that are going to have to be made. And I think we kind of had an experience like that when, we're in ongoing regarding preschool. I think for me, I do think that I know it's ridiculous, but the 5-year forecast, I think you should reintroduce this board to the 5-year forecast, not line item by line item, but in those categories, the bigger categories. I'm with Kareem. I like it when we go, scroll down and see how much farther we can go. But I think the board has to actually see the big picture of how much is benefits and salaries. So there's that big thing, and then there's these fixed costs or whatever. I would start with the 5-year forecast, and when you talk in terms of a target, what did we say? What did you say in the 5-year forecast for FY25 would be the target? I mean, I just think, but I'd stay away from trying to envision any kind of target right now, because all these questions are just too big. And it may give you a destination, but what it does is I think it gets us too far down the road, because I think these early steps are going to be very hard for the board to fully appreciate. But I mean, I'm liking what I'm seeing, and I think this is the kind of work that has to be done to get us where we need to go. Questions, comments? You good?
Okay, so the next topic is you asked for an inventory of the COPS. Because remember, the guidance we received from Dinsmore was if a property is already involved or encumbered in a COPS, you may not be able to do a new COPS on that particular property. So what we need to do is marry up the inventory of the existing properties that are encumbered on a COPS versus
ad hoc too.
Yes. And so Kevin put this presentation together for us.
So really, this is kind of the first step of identifying that, and you'll see under the column that says primary buildings. So the 2014, 2015, and 2021 are all tied to originally the master agreement and some of those local funded projects in 06. So the key buildings that related to that are Walnut Hills, Western Hills, Withrow, Woodward, and Hughes. And annually they ask for an insurance rider, and it includes all of those facilities. So I think those are going to be key in the discussion as to whether, if any are excluded, those would probably be the ones. In that project, though, there were also 26 buildings that received window and door replacements. That's a technical question for Dan and Brenda Weimer with Dinsmore as to, can we do additional work on those buildings? How are they encumbered in terms of the COPS? The 2012 COPS was 28 buildings receiving basically HVAC and lighting controls, which was modernization at 25 of the facilities and installing new systems at 3. There were new roofs involved with 3 schools, new security systems, and new elevators. And then the more recent that was actually a new project that, as opposed to just a refunding, was the 2018 COPS, which was more recent, obviously, was the acquisition of Mercy, Hands, Carthage, and Leap. So again, I believe those would be encumbered as part of that project. But this is this first step. We'll move towards getting some further advice from them. The next slide takes each of these projects and just gives you some basics when the final maturity is on all of those COPs, the rate range for those items, the original issue amount, and then the outstanding balance at the beginning of this fiscal year. I have some additional information that I did include here. So FY24 expenses related just to the COPs. Our payments will be $14.6 million this fiscal year related to all of these projects, and I have a breakdown of those. $10 million of that is principal, $4 million is interest. One of the things we did talk about, the 2014 COPs, we did refinance some of that. So the 2014 COPs will be completed December of 24, the ones that were not advance refunded. So the payment on that particular issue is actually $5 million this coming year. However, when you take COPs and all of our other debt issues, as we've gotten new ones, they're structured so that our payments stay fairly level. So even though we're paying off the 14, we're going to continue to have annual payments on all of our debt issues that stay relatively flat, if that makes sense. The other thing I'll point out is that for the 2012, we have a mandatory sinking fund, and so the district has required through mandatory sinking funds to set aside money, and we put $12 million specifically for that issue. So when it matures in 32, the mandatory sinking fund will have $25 million within it to make that payment.
So a sinking fund is we pretend like we're making debt payments and interest payments. It goes into that account. It doesn't actually pay down the debt. It just when it comes due, that money's already in an account to go pay it.
And we have two other issues that are not COPs that are the same function. They function the same way.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because Red Tree manages the investment of those funds, and the interest is accrued back to that fund.
Questions? Good. So the schools that are here, the vast majority of them, we couldn't again spend new COP money.
Might not be able to.
Some of them we'd have to argue about or whatever,
Well,
like the windows
Dinsmore
and
would
the.
have to do that for us, but yeah, so that's why we need the list of the new projects compared to the list of these old prior projects. And then David and Brenda will go and review them to see whether they can be encumbered under a new COPS or not. Or we might be able to structure a different financing pool.
So very helpful.
Good.
And the administration's putting together the whole maintenance master plan.
Yes.
So is that what's going to be? Are we still doing the?
Yes, next week. Yes.
So what we will do for that is provide as customary, we'll provide the information in advance.
Okay.
So that it can be reviewed, and then we'll do the fact finding.
Great, and it'll be really that. I would imagine we're not going to have a lot of time, but I mean, it would be the overall maintenance.
That's correct. It covers all things maintenance. So painting, roofs,
great. That's
HVAC.
That's great.
All of that.
Perfect.
Feels.
We might not get to this part of that.
Yes, we will. I'm
Yeah,
adding
we put it in
slides
part
at the
of
end
it.
of there so
Right.
that
To explain
your funding
this?
issues. Yes, I'll add
Okay.
some of that detail, but just to say, here are all the different funding options. One of which is, I would not recommend, is moving millage, inside millage, because that's like an unvoted tax increase. I'm gonna take that off because I wouldn't even recommend it. But all the different kinds of levies that have options to you, whether you want to borrow, do it official borrowing or a COPS. So that's all in the slide there. Okay, so next on the list was you asked me to remind you, thank you.
The levy. See ya. Thank you.
On the levy renewal that's coming up and what the options are on that. So it's a $48 million fixed sum. It's called an emergency levy. I don't know why they use emergency for those levies, but they do.
To make people not vote for it.
So you can renew, excuse me, you can renew and increase the time up to 10 years. You can increase the time up to 10 years and increase the value of it, and it's still called a renewal.
Good.
If you want to increase it and go to continuing, it's called a substitute levy, which still sounds like it's treated like a renewal. The biggest difference is whether this original issuance or the original levy itself was done prior to 2013 or post 2013. Prior to 2013, if you do a substitute levy, you lose your rollback tax implications. But this was done in 2016, so rollback doesn't even apply to this levy, so it's not an
Okay.
issue. So those are your two options. You can do a renewal, change it up to 10 years, change the value, increase the value or decrease the value. And then if you want to go continuing with it, you would do a substitute levy, which would be probably harder to explain to the public.
Well, or it might look more transparent if we call it a substitute, because if you call it a straight renewal, if it's more money and longer, they'll say, what are you sneaking by? So who knows how to play it.
Well,
So-
we've done 2 renewals,
Mhm.
extending the time to 10 years.
And that's worked,
Yes.
but not changing the amount of money.
What she doesn't outline in here is if you want to do a substitute levy, if you can do it for less than continuing. Like, if we do a substitute levy, can you do it for 20 years instead of continuing? Okay, we'll have to research that. We've never done a substitute levy before, so she probably didn't think to give us that level of detail. Okay. I think I read that somewhere. But anyway, if that's the direction we want to go in, then we can certainly review further.
Are we going to find out at the fact finding? Are we going to find out that indeed just doing the maintenance piece of the FMP, there's 65 buildings plus, because there's 5 or 6 buildings besides the FMP. Are we going to find out that that's going to be so cost prohibitive that just doing that is going to require a permanent improvement levy, or what
I
kind of levy would
anticipate
that be?
anticipate that to be true, but I don't want to get out in front of the superintendent. So
Okay, so as we look at that, for whatever, this doesn't necessarily, that presentation is not necessarily going to take care of the changes that we may need because of
ad hoc.
Ad hoc.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
All right, and so the under other business, Cincinnati Preschool Promise was scheduled to present today. They elected not to because the financial report that I received at CPP Finance on Tuesday hasn't been shared with their board. They don't want to share it with our board until their board blesses it. That's the timing of the meetings. But they're going to be presenting it to their board on the 19th, which is Tuesday. And she asked me to extend an invitation to all of you to attend. It's their annual meeting. It's open to the public, but she specifically want to invite board members. It is from 4 to 6 at the Greater Cincinnati Foundation on September 19th, which is Tuesday. And then they will come in October to present their year-end financial results.
And based upon the calls that I got regarding Preschool Promise after Monday night's meeting, and what we just talked about today, do this Preschool Promise people understand about the money? Because I did think we said that it was going to be to the trusted entity, but I think the superintendent has said something different. I'm happy that she said it, but I think there's some confusion about the money and whether or not it exists, it goes with that, or where it's going.
So the CPP Finance Committee is aware that the budget was approved at the higher value, with the caveat that it doesn't get spent. We did not go into us holding them funds. That I didn't discuss that because it was the very next day and I hadn't thought that through. So I don't know how much their full board understands because they haven't had a board meeting since, I don't think.
Okay. But that's where we are now. We're now going to communicate to them. Is that
I will speak directly to Ms. Jackson about changing the treasurer's report to hold that money back until the agreement is done complete. But we'll pay, so I'll just take their total, subtract the money out, and then follow the way the formula that Hector and I came up with at the very beginning about the first payment's reduced by the carryover, and then the next 3 payments are equal payments.
well, that's farther than I need to know. I just, right, all I need to know right now is that the money's staying here, general agreement.
That's correct.
And so there's not the need for the MOU, but there is a need to expedite the general.
Yes, MOU is my term. I don't think that's the term Dan used. Something about a temporary agreement. I called it an MOU, so. Yes.
And I understood that we were holding it. I don't understand if you give it to them now or give it to them later, it's being withheld. But I understand, you know, we want to keep it. So, but I do think that because there was an amendment to specifically withhold it, there needs to be an agreement outlining that understanding. So you want to call it an MOU, call it a certificate, whatever, but there needs to be that caveat there.
I'm just saying that what was said here today was different than what was, I think, what was said as I understood it on Monday night. And so, but it's the same thing. They can't spend it.
Right.
But the issue that it will cause a little bit more consternation that we're holding it versus the trusted entity, as I always like to call United Way. Yes, sir.
Well, and I think part of what we said with that is that we can't allocate funds that is not approved by the board for the purposes. And so I think it is fair to say that we would hold until we reach an agreement as to what can and can't be done. But I think to your point, it is helpful to give them some clarity as to what that process looks like.
Yes.
Sounds good. Anything else? Anybody get? Good, please. Welcome. And if you're still with us, you get a star.
Sally Grimes, please go ahead.
Sally. To the bitter end, Sally, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. My name is Sally Grimes. I'm the Executive Director of Activities Beyond the Classroom, better known as ABC. ABC is a standalone 501c3 nonprofit that for almost 20 years now has supported extracurricular programs for CPS students through fundraising, citywide partnerships, and contracts with the district. ABC's programs include athletics, arts, wellness, world languages, and more. In an average year, we receive over $2 million from generous donors throughout the city to support these activities. I'd like to thank Josh Harden for raising the visibility of tennis in CPS. ABC has provided in-school and after-school tennis programs for nearly a decade within CPS and for CPS children, thanks to the funding we've secured from Tennis for Charity. Throughout the years, we've provided hundreds of thousands of dollars in tennis programming for CPS children. Our staff is currently working with Matt, who presented today, and the Tennis Foundation, and we look forward to continuing that work in the future. We are fully committed to raising funds and delivering tennis programs to CPS children. I'd also like to thank Josh for reminding everybody of the partnership with the Reds Community Fund. I'm happy to confirm that the Diamond Sports donation the Reds give to ABC every year are secure for FY24. We stand by to receive those donations from the Reds Community Fund and manage them in partnership with CPS. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sally. Jen Wagner.
So, thank you, Sally. We've been working together in developing a really nice financial report that's going to be done quarterly. And I've invited Ms. Grimes to come to Finance Committee, as CPP does, to present their financials, because they're doing some great stuff and there's a lot of donations and we're just not aware and not recognizing all that's being done. And then we don't always understand how that money's being used. because all we see in the financial reports is it's a payment to ABC as a professional service, right? We want to know more details about how those activities are funded and so hopefully at the end of the second quarter, they'll be able to report it in the new structure. So good
That's great.
collaborative
Thanks
work.
for working on that, Jen. Is that it? Thank you all. We are adjourned.